Coming up on One Detroit, a new Oakland County Executive, plus the Vice President in town praising the economy, headlines with Nolan and Stephen Henderson. Also coming up, a closer look at getting to the root of crime and violence. And then head over to the Pink Flamingo in North Corktown. I'm Christy McDonald. We're in Midtown at the Kitchen by Cooking with Q. Join me. One Detroit is coming up.
Masco Corporation is proud to manufacture innovative and environmentally friendly products for the home. Delta faucets, craft-made in Merillat cabinets, and Behr brand paints have all been designed with you in mind. Masco and its family of companies, serving Michigan communities since 1929.
Support also provided by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, a partner with communities where children come first. The Cynthia and Edsel Ford Fund for Journalism at Detroit Public TV. The Detroit Journalism Engagement Fund, and by
Business Leaders for Michigan has 5 priorities to make Michigan a top 10 state. Achieve a balanced budget, cut long-term debt, fix our roads, improve all levels of education, further economic growth, plan for a stronger Michigan. How does diversity bring energy to us all? At DTE Energy, we believe that it's the contributions of all that build great communities. As a company, we grow stronger by welcoming the unique perspectives of everyone. As community members, we support our state's broad culture and heritage. From working closely with women and minority-owned suppliers to embracing our local cultures, DTE Energy is powering diversity. The DTE Energy Foundation is a proud sponsor of Detroit Public Television.
Also brought to you by Ally, NISSAN Foundation, and viewers like you. Thank you.
I got sick, found out I had sarcoidosis, and then I was allergic to dairy at the same time. It was like the end of the world. So I got to figure out what I got to do. So I started wanting to make everything that I would eat normally plant-based. People ask me so many times, Q, how did you change your diet? How did you change your diet? How did you change your diet? I was like, I'm gonna create a website and I'm gonna show you all the recipes I make so you don't have to think twice about it. But then they're like, show me how to make the recipes. So I wanted to show people how to make the food. People learn in a comfortable environment. So when people came to this space, I wanted them to feel like they were at home and I wanted them to feel like it was a part of the family. So I'm like, hey, walk around like you own the place. I wanted to put it in the city of Detroit so I could bring people to see what you can be. You can do this in Detroit. It's not about the money. Like, I'm not here because I want to be a billionaire. Like, I'm here because I want 1 billion people to learn how to eat better.
Hi there and welcome to One Detroit. Thanks to Q for showing us around the kitchen here in Midtown as we make ourselves comfortable during meal prep. We have a lot coming up for you on One Detroit. Nolan and Stephen Henderson will join me and give some perspective on the new Oakland County Executive sworn in this week. Plus, we'll tackle more headlines, including Vice President Pence in town touting a strong economy, and we'll see when we can expect a budget here in Michigan. Also coming up on the show, Nolan has a frank conversation on his radio show about crime and violence in the city with Pastor Barry from Islandview. We'll have that for you. And then head over to North Corktown to the Pink Flamingo. It's a pop-up restaurant that brings a neighborhood together. We will check it out for you coming up. So let's bring in Nolan Finley of the Detroit News and Stephen Henderson of American Black Journal. Hi, guys. We've got you straight in the kitchen now. No cooking, though. No cooking involved.
I noticed we haven't been fed yet.
Exactly. So you're going to get cranky. All right, we'll get some food coming up soon. You know, as I continue to dodge barrels everywhere I drive, I drive this summer, it strikes me we are getting closer and closer to September without any kind of roads deal or really budget. And you have schools that are waiting to see what they're going to be able to have to spend. So how hot is it going to get in September in Lansing, Nolan?
I think, I think we're back to the old days where we go right up to October 1st and then we do some brinksmanship budgeting. We're going to shut it down. No, it's not going to be the orderly process you saw when you had one-party rule. And I guess that's natural, but with this road funding issue on the table, I think it can get pretty contentious because will they pass a budget without answering that question? How are we going to fund the roads?
I know you thought we've learned, though, from getting that budget done a little bit earlier, but here we are.
Yeah, well, Mike Shirkey, the Senate Majority Leader, says that they're close to a deal among leadership. But I think that's sort of important. That's an important distinction, right? That doesn't mean that the members themselves will vote for it. And that may be the sticking point. I think they may be able to come to agreement between the leaders of the legislature and the governor on what to do. I don't know that they can get the rank and file to actually vote for it.
All right, so this week also we now have a new Oakland County Executive after a lot of dealing. The former mayor of Ferndale, for now until
For 16 months, though. I mean, he's got a
Well,
good
or
long
until
run.
the court decides on the,
Well,
the
the shenanigans
challenge of the
question, right?
shenanigans, which
Yeah.
is not insignificant. And I think this process and the way the process was handled by the board ought to worry Oakland County residents who are used to sort of a very business-like, scandal-free government in their county. And the way that was carried out, the hurry-up manner in which they did the process and then bypassed their own process to appoint a guy who hadn't even applied for the job is a bit worrisome, and we ought to be worried about what's to come in Oakland County.
Yeah, well, it's a little bit of the I'm shocked to find out there's politics in this
right.
establishment. I mean,
that was pretty
same kind
sleazy
of thing,
politics.
The same kind of stuff went on when Brooks was in charge, and it would
I
just
can't think of
favored
an example.
Republicans.
I
The
can't think of an
redrawing of the
example.
county, the redistricting thing was absolute shenanigans.
But when you look at this,
little bit of
where
politics there.
David Woodward resigned and then said, "Oh, my hand was never off the checker,
Right.
so I didn't resign." I mean,
They'll
come
res-
on.
they'll-
I'm
So
not sure that's going to
the
stand
great
up
They're
in
gonna
court.
resolve
The great
that,
thing
huh?
here is that the choice they made, David Coulter, is actually a very strong candidate.
Mm-hmm.
Not just to do the job for 16 months. I think that's somebody who, if he ran, would be a very strong candidate for the seat.
Did he
permanently.
promise not to?
He has not. He has said. I talked to him actually this morning on the radio, and he says he's thinking about it.
So he didn't
wants
have to
get
make
into
that
the job.
commitment
He
to
did
get the
not have
job.
to
Okay.
promise not to run. He promised to think about it. This is somebody who is a collaborator across the aisles. He worked with Brooks when he was on the commission. Somebody who Republicans respect in many more ways than Dave Woodward or Andy Meisner, who are more partisans, I think, in the county. I think if he gets in and gets the chance, he may win people over pretty quickly.
What can you do in 16 months, Nolan?
Well, basically what he needs to do is just maintain the status quo out there. It's a county that's prosperous. The budget's balanced through for 2 more years, I think, at least through 2020. There's not a whole lot of pressing issues. His challenge will be keeping that Brooks team in place through the next election, when the permanent county executive can then come in and hire a new team.
Do you think that Brooks team will stay?
I don't know. I think that's the unanswered question.
He said
I think
he's
that depends on him.
He's talked with some of them about whether they would stay. I think he's interested in keeping people who want to stay and be part of it. But he's got some other blockbuster, I think, appointments that he has in mind. People who are really going to help him do things a little differently in Oakland County than Brooks did, and people whose competency and professionalism matches the folks who are already there.
Vice President Mike Pence in town, again, just giving the attention and the love to Michigan that we know it's going to be getting in the next 16 months, again, as we talk about. He said the economy is strong, Nolan.
Well, and he was joined in a surprise visit or appearance by Dr. Ben Carson, the HUD secretary, who showed up at the Econ Club before his speech. Nobody knew he was coming out. It was a pretty good moment and a good speech. You know, I think he said, he told the truth about the economy. We are still growing. We are prospering still, continued one of the longest growth periods we've ever had in this country. But he did talk about the warning signs ahead. And, you know, I wrote a piece about that. Some things, there's some barriers ahead that Donald Trump could knock down, and some barriers the Congress has to knock down, or we do risk going in recession, and they all involve trade. We got to get that trade deal passed, and that's what Pence said. And we've got to resolve this trade war with China. And Trump seems hell-bent on perpetuating it.
A lot of people are nervous, Stephen, that we're going to be seeing a recession sooner than later. Is that still going to be, do you think, one of the key issues in the election?
I think there's almost no way the economy doesn't slow down before the election. I mean, it just seems improbable for any number of reasons, not least of which is that it has been so long since we've had a correction, and we're overdue one. I mean, there are a lot of places where the economy is inflated that need to be corrected. The trade issue is what will make the difference between a small correction or a minor one and a major setback. If the president doesn't back off his approach, I mean, you could really send the economy into as deep a recession as we've seen, in many years.
Congress has to act in the best interest of the country. That trade deal that Trump negotiated is very favorable to labor. It's very favorable to most Democratic interests. The reason it's not being debated and not being voted on is politics. They don't want to give Trump a victory in advance of the election. You got to get beyond that and act to head off this recession. It's irresponsible not to.
You know what? One thing that we want to talk about, Nolan, this week you kind of devoted a lot of your show on the radio in the morning on 910 to taking a look at crime and violence in the city. And you had Pastor Barry Randolph from the Church of the Messiah in Islandview, who we've had on the show
very powerful
a number of
advocate.
times talking about that.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to do that because, you know, the day we had those mass shootings in El Paso and Dayton, 3 guys with guns shot up Rouge Park, shot multiple rounds into a crowd, a large crowd, and it could have easily been as bad as El Paso or Dayton or worse, and only one person was struck, Frankie Marks, a mother of 7, picnicking with her children, 5 of her nieces and nephews and her 2 sisters, just doing what people do, picnicking in a park, and 3 folks in a beef about a basketball game shot the place up. She was shot and killed with her children clinging to her and barely got a mention. This, you know, I called it, you know, a rolling mass shooting in Detroit. 300 people almost killed every year. Many of them, like this Frankie Marks, just people who in the wrong place at the wrong time and got killed.
And I think sometimes it leads to a larger question or conversation of we become desensitized to a lot of things that are happening around us. Let's go ahead and take a look at the conversation that you had with Pastor Barry and then talk about it.
Psychologically, it wears down on you. You know, so many times we think about what it must be like to live under a terrorist state. And sometimes you deal with the same psychological issues. We have people who are afraid to go certain places because of the trauma that they've experienced. We did a funeral a little over 2 months ago for a young man who was killed in a drive-by, and all he was going to do was pick up his prom date. It had nothing. He just went to go pick her up, and he was in a car with his best friend, and somebody mistakenly shot up the wrong car, killed him. His best friend witnessed the murder, and it was tragic. And when we did the funeral, hundreds of the kids from the neighboring high school came to that funeral, and they were all under great stress and trauma. So the week after his funeral was the graduation, and it was, instead of a joyous occasion, it was much more somber.
And that happens. That happens routinely in the community you serve.
The thing about it is, in Islandview, where Church of the Messiah is, there is not much gun violence directly in that community and neighborhood. It's mostly surrounded by it. But we have been working on it for the past 17 years. We've made a concerted effort to be able to deal with the root causes of gun violence. And that, a lot of times, are the things that people don't talk about. We have to get down to the root causes, which is more societal issues more than anything else. One of the things that we're really trying to work on is really getting down to those causes, really helping with things like employment. And we do a lot of employment for people who are returning citizens. So people who may be felons, we really try to help them get jobs. And we're working with Judge Kelly Ramsey out of Frank Murphy Hall of Justice. And she sends us over people who need help. And so we try to help them with everything from employment, but sometimes even food, sometimes housing, getting a driver's license, clothing, resume writing, all of those things. But also, too, we do a lot with entrepreneurship. We have 213 units of affordable housing. We do a lot with young people and mentoring. So it takes a lot to be able to do this, but we just cannot just sit back and allow this to happen in our community and neighborhood without taking proactive steps.
So this is not just a law enforcement issue.
No.
And when we talk about violence in the city, we look to the police, and we look to the police for solutions, for answers. But this goes well beyond law enforcement.
Absolutely. It with us, we look at it from a point of view of it's a societal issue. Law enforcement is also part of our society, and they have a particular job that they have to do. But sometimes you're going to need people who are boots on the ground. You do need politician. You need the business leaders. It's going to take everybody to be able to do this. But part of the reason why we do the work that we do is because we couldn't wait for everybody to come to the table. There were certain things we had to do right then, and we're continuously working to make this happen.
So do you sense at all that Detroit has a comprehensive anti-violence strategy, anti-gun violence strategy?
Absolutely not. It's one of those things where it's going to take a lot of work. When you stop and think about what is the true cost of gun violence, what does it cost? Not just from the point of view of a person who may be shot, and sometimes we think about the person is murdered. Now, when you stop and think about that, like with Frankie was murdered. And then that brings in everything from now she needs funeral services. Now it brings in, too, how is that going to affect her children? How is that going to affect the income of the family, which was a two-income family? Now there's one income, and the dad is there with 7 children, and he's going to need other types of help. We don't think about that. Hospitalization, it's so many things to think about.
You know, you watch that and you listen to that, and you listen to all the things that Pastor Barry says that they're working on with kids and trying to build different kind of relationships. But what was your thought in
Well, I
seeing
mean,
that?
my first thought is that he's got the right idea, right? That this is not, I think when we talk about this problem in the city, often we talk about it as a policing problem, we talk about it as a prosecutorial problem. We don't talk enough about the culture change that needs to take place in this city, in different communities, in many different communities where we value life a lot more, both inside the community and from outside, right? A lot of people in Islandview don't feel like they matter, they don't feel like their lives matter. There are a lot of reasons for that, and we've got to start attacking those. Pastor Barry's doing working miracles, I think, at trying to do it from his end, but there are a lot of other things that need to be done in terms of creating opportunity, in terms of investing in education, and all of the other things that are broken in those communities to really solve that.
And that's just really one church and one organization,
Yeah.
but you know that there's a number of people that are trying to do this in small little pockets and small ways around the city.
And you know, his point is, it's fine to talk, after these shootings, to have the conversation about legislation and what we need to do in terms of guns, and but we've also got to address the mindset that says it's okay when you get in a beef over a basketball game to grab a gun and start shooting up a place. There's something wrong with that. And he talked about the hopelessness and poverty, and changing the way people think about life and the way they value life. But he said, what impressed me, he said 300 people go to that church out there at Church of the Messiah. Every single one of them knows someone who's been murdered, and they have a room. We did our interview the first time in a room of the church that's set aside to honor the murder victims from that community. And there are pictures all over the walls, and it really does drive it home.
And I get the sense from you, though, Nolan, is that you're also chafing against the fact that we don't feel like, are we taking this seriously enough, or that we're just not, it's just another shooting, another day, another violence. You talked about the attack on the young girl who was killed by dogs, that we're just, it's just passing us by saying, well, another, what can we do?
We just shrugged. And I don't know how any of us eats today, sleeps today, thinking about what happened to that young girl this week in Detroit, 9 years old, doing what kids do, riding her bicycle on the streets of an American city. She wasn't in the outback, or she wasn't swimming in the ocean, and she was eaten alive by 3 pit bulls. Think about the horror, and how can we just shrug?
So where do we take the outrage, or how do we change the way we're now perceiving this?
I mean, again, there are a lot of aspects of American life that devalue life. The gun culture is one of them. The popular culture, which also devalues life. Historic and systemic racism, which devalues life in cities like Detroit, so that when somebody who's African American or Latino is killed, we don't have the same outrage as when somebody else is. I mean, all of these things sort of conspire together to make us sort of inured, I think, to the kind of outrage that we ought to that we ought to have.
A lot to keep talking about. It was a great segment on your radio show. All right, and finally tonight, let's head to Detroit's North Corktown neighborhood. We found a pop-up restaurant serving food out of an Airstream camper. It's called the Pink Flamingo, and it's based on locally sourced food with the idea of bringing neighbors closer together in what was once a vacant lot. Take a look.
The main idea behind the Pink Flamingo is gathering around food that's grown and sourced as close to this location as possible. We source from Fisheye Farms, which is in Core City. They're also nearby. Motor City Seafood. Well, we're opening a carryout restaurant over on Woodward between 6 and 7 Mile, so across from Palmer Park. This space is just a pop-up. We just do this out on Thursdays. The carryout will be a more consistent spot. It's mainly me and my partner, Kali.
Nothing was there. Sometimes the grass was cut by others. Sometimes it wasn't. And one day, I guess Kylie and Mako got creative and I looked up and bingo, the Pink Flamingo.
The flamingo, for instance, everybody is pink underneath this top layer of skin. It's just little subtle things to try to remind people like who we really are.
Everybody's involved in preparing the food and serving the food and making sure that the experience here is really welcoming and enjoyable. We make a different menu every week, a different meal. We do a vegetarian option, a vegan option, and a meat or fish option. The majority of stuff comes from like 2 square miles.
Yeah, we provide a lot of the veg, herbs, and salad that people are eating every Thursday. It's one thing to buy local, whatever, but like only in Detroit can you have food that was just harvested a couple hours ago and being served to people. You know what I mean? You can't do that in another American city because there's logistics and it takes days and stuff sits on a truck. And so the stuff that you get from urban farms is superior in freshness and in nutrient density and in flavor too. You'll see.
We've been taking care of this land, and every year the space becomes a little bit more inviting, I guess you could say.
We're so AI, I'm so my job. If people could just stop for a minute and stare into the fire, like be at peace with themselves, we got you. Right. You'll feel love. Oh, I feel loved in the world. Now I can be my best self.
Enjoy it, be safe, be welcomed by people like myself, my family, and the Pink Flamingo. So it helps bring awareness that there are good people here in this city.
I think it's important for people just to have like real experiences, you know, and like not have to have a facade on all the time or act a certain way or have to present a certain way or look a certain way. If we can create a setting where people feel comfortable and they can come and enjoy themselves and maybe try some new food or meet a new person, spend 2 hours outside as opposed to being inside looking at a screen or looking at their phone or watching TV, then we're providing an experience that is worthwhile and meaningful.
And that'll do it for One Detroit this week. I'm Christy McDonald. Make sure you join us back here next Thursday. Check us out at DetroitPBS.org. Thanks to Q and The Kitchen for having us. See you next week. Nolan's actually eating vegan mac and cheese, so we got to go over here.